All right, what's up, you guys? So we have the two summer hardcourt lead-up masters to the U.S. Open now in the rear view. They have come and gone in Canada and Cincinnati. We are, of course, just a couple days out from the U.S. Open's first Sunday start ever, and we have a draw out, and that will be taken care of imminently, but in a separate video. For now, I wanted to just catch up on the action during this North American hardcourt summer. And certainly I did want to talk immediately after Shelton won the title and do a video then out at the Rogers Cup. But I turned out to be quite preoccupied during the course of the Cincinnati Open this year, really. Even from quali rounds on, I volunteered at the tournament this year. For the first time, since my 1 year of ball boying back in 2014, back when I was a wee lad and I had no resistance to adversity whatsoever and standing out in the sun all day, coming back exhausted, tapped out after the 1 year. But I will say, yeah, this year was a really, really great experience. This time volunteering, getting a gig with the locker room. Really interesting perspective on the inside. Just having insane proximity to pretty much everybody that played the event this year. Um, Barring Zverev, who I assume, probably felt ill beforehand and wanted to contain that before it was blatantly obvious, of course, in the semifinals. Um, for whatever reason. Yeah, that's my best guess. But he didn't use the locker room throughout the course of the tournament. But everybody else, I was in and around throughout the course of this tournament. It was unfortunate that the weather ended up overshadowing and taking away from the limelight a little bit. Just what a bang up job I thought they did in renovating the facilities at this event. Of course, the players were very vocal in their praise for, the revamped and facelifted Cincinnati Open this year. I thought, just brilliant job making it even more fan and player friendly. Those practice courts and, all the seating around it, the new Champions Court, all of it just bang up job, and hopefully makes for this event. It would look that way, finding its permanent home, or at least home for the foreseeable future, in Cincinnati, which was uncertain a couple years ago. But of course, the weather ended up resulting in the tennis not quite being able to deliver to the highest of its capabilities during the course of the event, because it was blazing throughout the course of the tournament. I think it's like cruel irony, for those of you that may not know, I am from Mason, Ohio, so this tournament is in my backyard, and I've been attending since 2009, pretty much every single year, all but one. And bookending this tournament, what's cruel irony is we probably have had the most pleasant weather we've had all summer. Literally the week leading in, which maybe we got 1 day of during the tournament, the first day of main draw, and ever since Monday, it has been like low 80s, mid 70s as our highs every single day. So, that's bookending the tournament. Literally immediately bookending it on each end, and in the middle throughout the course of the tournament, it was just searing, like humidity plus just 90s, and the feels like even higher every single day. And of course, it resulted in a bunch of retirements, the most noteworthy being the final, where I think not heat related, but Yannick Sinner just ended up falling ill and being unable to go beyond 5 games of the final. Being someone that was in attendance, and I'd never been to a final before. That's another great thing of volunteering at the tournament, is you're just able to, go watch the tennis anytime that you're not working without having to buy a ticket. It was it seemed like a slam dunk, right? Like Sinner Alcaraz making the final. You can't go wrong with that. But um yeah, unfortunately, that's just how the cookie crumbled, and we ended up getting, you would have to say, the biggest stinker to this point. Even if, that outcome wasn't really ever in control, the biggest stinker in the Sinker-ass rivalry to this point. But thankfully, the women's final did salvage the session a little bit, picked up the slack. It was a much more high quality and competitive final than I think most of us expected, with Paolini putting in a really, really spirited fight against Iga, for that tight straight sets outcome. But I, of course, did want to play catch up on the North American hardcourt summer. Thought the best way of going about that would be revisiting the power rankings I did in my last video after DC. There's certainly been a little bit of shakeup throughout that top 10. Not at the top, but in the back half, certainly. And yeah, without further ado, let's just get into it. Power rankings. Number 1, nothing changes. Jannik Sinner still has to be tops. He is still in the midst of, one of the most impressive by the numbers peaks that you would have to say we've seen on hard courts. I mean, over the better part of the last 2 years, for non-Carlos Alcaraz players, he has been almost untouchable. And, it's pretty telling of where Jannik Sinner is right now, that you feel like there was a little bit left to be desired out of his weeks in Cincinnati, his matches in Cincinnati, even though he made the final, and that too doing it without losing a set. But of course, his draw, a lot of guys got upset in his half, and he wasn't properly tested, even though there were definitely strong moments of resistance from Gab Diallo, Adrian Manarino, and then the fairy tale of the tournament with Terence Ottman playing out of his shoes tennis throughout his matches in Cincinnati, going to the semifinals as a qualifier, and even putting up a good fight against Jannik, who you thought would snuff out his Cinderella run pretty abruptly. But for Sinner's end, I thought, serve, forehand just weren't quite up to par throughout the course of the tournament. Wasn't at his sharpest. But he wasn't at his sharpest as well when he won the title last year as well. And, of course, he went on to dominate in New York. And this is just what Jannik Sinner does against the field, right? Like, he makes finals. He's going back to over a year ago, right? This time last year, since losing in the quarters, I think, of Canada, there's only been one event where Jannik hasn't made the final or better of, and that is Halle this year. Otherwise, it's been final or title everywhere that he's played, and kept that going in Cincinnati, even if it wasn't the cleanest week for him. The entire body of work is just too overwhelming to, remotely change anything on Sinner's outlook heading to the U.S. Open. This is pretty clear cut. This is the guy on hard courts, so he's still the favorite. Number 2, Carlos Alcaraz also retains his spot in these power rankings, and while it's not your typical Masters 1000 title run with both Zverev, Sinner being compromised at various points in their respective matches against Carlos, I am taking more stock in this title run than I think most are, at least from what I've seen in discourse. And, while it is nice that he held up the best against these adverse conditions, and also even better, the confidence boost of winning a big title on a fast hard court, conditions where he has been most vulnerable so far early on in his career, I'm taking the most stock in his level in the quarters and the semifinals. Obviously, throughout the course of this title run, there was still, some of the typical sloppiness at times, which, you can't completely iron out with him. That's just part and parcel of his game, I think, until proven otherwise right now. But as is also typically the case, the highs outweigh it, and the highs in the quarters and the semis, I think that's the type of level that he will need if he is to play disruptor. Uh, with Sinner's chokehold on the hard courts, particularly the hard court slams in the last 2 years. And I think it's huge that he put forth that type of level. I mean, the quarters I thought was a great win against an A-level Andrei Rublev, who I think has really found something. That match being as close as it was, I think was more a credit to what Rublev did than what Alcaraz didn't. And then Zverev, that was very high level, at least for the first set. Obviously, very quickly after that, Sasha, the wheels fell off for him, and he just had nothing in the legs, or his body just wouldn't allow him to put up much resistance. Before those first 11 games of the match, pretty much immediately after Carlitos broke in the first game of the second, Zverev was just out of gas. But those first 11 games were like God mode Carlos Alcaraz. And I don't think at any point during Wimbledon this year did he put forth, apex Carlos Alcaraz. If he did, it was against Nori, and, it's just much more degree of difficulty to pull it off against, again, A-level Andrei Rublev. And at least Zverev for a set was definitely more able and, putting up stern resistance. So, the fact that we saw apex Carlos Alcaraz, at least for a little bit in this tournament, I think that he's battle tested now. I think that he is ready, he's confident, he's continued this uber consistency since clay court season. I think Alcaraz goes in on a high heading to New York. He's still at 2. Number 3, I go Novak Djokovic. He also retains his spot from the last power ranking, and I think that, for Novak, it's very interesting because this is one of, a couple of times now in the last couple of years where he's going to be going into the U.S. Open cold turkey. He did so in the Olympic years in 2021 and 2024. And both times he was rusty out of the gates in New York, especially early rounds. Last year, of course, we get the outlier result for him in slams in the last couple of years where he wasn't able to overcome him not being at his best and lost early third round to Popperin. But he does have a very good draw here. Obviously a tough opener, but if he is able to get out of that one, which he should, there's time for him to sharpen up, and he is in the Alcaraz half, not the Sinner half, as opposed to the last 2 slams. And, certainly he's more confident. He's in a better space in the Alcaraz head-to-head, particularly on hard courts, where to this point I think he's undefeated against Carlos. Obviously, he's always fighting the age thing, even if it's a better matchup for him. But yeah, nothing's changed even sitting out. Like, he's still the 3rd best player in tennis when he wants to be. His slam runs this year demonstrate that. And certainly if he's able to get to the business end of this tournament, he will go all out. And definitely put his best foot forward to see if he can make it back into a slam final, especially not having Sinner in his way. Number 4, it's Sasha Zverev. First change on this list. He moves up a spot. Semis in both Toronto and Cincinnati, actually a point away from making the final in Toronto. And yeah, overall, a successful swing for him. I thought he looked at least refreshed, finally taking a, prolonged enough break, after playing so much. He always has played, so much, minimal breaks relative to his peers at the top. And he got that break off after Wimbledon. I thought Canada still looked kind of scratchy, but Cincinnati before, I believe it might have been tied to his diabetes, but if not, whatever illness that he was suffering with, that didn't really give him a chance to go all the way in Cincinnati. But before that, in Cincinnati, he was looking very, very convincing. Uh, dominated Ben Shelton and pretty much everybody else prior to the Alcaraz match. And yeah, Zverev on clay and hard courts. If he's performing anywhere near his best, then he's going to find himself at the business end of tournaments. And he got back to doing that. Number five, stock Ben Shelton. He was 10 on this list. He halves that power ranking up to five. And you can talk about no sinner Alcaraz in Canada, but in so many facets, that felt like a pretty, impactful breakthrough, you know, in the wins, in the result, obviously, and also to the eye test. It looked like an evolved version of Ben Shelton. And he was putting in so many more returns. It felt like he was breaking a lot more. Obviously, the quality wins. I think he'd not had a top 10 win before that event, but yeah, straight sets de Minaur, straight sets Fritz. I think those two matches were like the two best I've seen Ben Shelton, where, we've always talked about the potential with him and it only being like, I think his uh, third full year on tour after, he played in college. He's always been very raw, but those two matches were as complete as I've seen him look, where everything sort of came together for him, dominated both, de Minaur and Fritz, and just seemed like a different guy within rallies, more willing to defend, definitely a whole lot more patient. Yeah, all in all, just breaking when he needed to, broke Kachanov multiple times. Same with Fritz, same with de Minaur, same with Kaboli. Return's been a real big problem for Ben, but not only was he opportune, but it just felt like he was putting in so many more returns. That version of Ben Shelton, and it does seem like it's in the works. It wasn't just in Canada. I mean, he logged a very good win over, Yiji Lehechka. He found his serve under siege a bunch. I was at that match against Shelton. Of course, it came crashing down for him against Zverev in the quarterfinals, but again, I thought it was a great result for him to back up the Canada title, make it straight back to a quarter in Cincinnati in a career where you've been looking for a run like this, to string together a couple deep runs for a stretch outside of the slams, and certainly semifinal, title, and quarterfinal across DC, Canada, and Cincinnati before he ran out of gas. That also contributed to how one-sided it was against Zverev. But that's exactly what you've been looking for. And yeah, I'm really excited for Ben. I think this is very real. And, it's certainly him being a best of five riser. He had a great chance to go see Carlos again, get another bite at the apple at the slams, where he's only been denied by Sinner Alcaraz this year. At 6, Taylor Fritz. He drops 2 spots from my initial ranking. And yeah, I don't think that he had the North American hardcore season that I would have expected. To me, would have been at the top of guys that, would have taken advantage of two best players in the world, among, others, being absent for the first half of this North American hardcourt season, neither doing so in DC nor Canada. And yeah, even for the matches that he was winning, I never felt like Taylor Fritz really was at his best. And I do have a sneaky feeling that some of that could be marked up to fatigue. I mean, there's a lot of tennis the guy has played in the last 2 months. He played 3 lead-ins and then went deep at Wimbledon in July. And then this month, of course, played 3 more lead-ins. And he's the only guy of, the semi-finalists at Wimbledon that opted to play Canada. And not only did he opt to play Canada, he played DC as well. Uh, and coming away with no finals, at least, across those three events, I think can be viewed as a disappointment. He'll probably feel like he left some meat on the bone this summer, but of course, all can be salvaged, but there's a lot of points coming up to defend with the US Open final. He still remains, among the guys that, is just most consistently bringing something resembling his ceiling, and obviously it's been in the net positive direction big time since the midpoint of this season. Still got to look at him among, the top of these tier 2 guys. 7, Jack Draper as well, drops a spot, and that's just kind of by virtue of him, being unable to play throughout the course of this North American hardcourt summer, sat out since Wimbledon with an injury. Little bit of mystery there with how he'll show up in his return to action at the US Open straight away. For what it's worth, I thought that he looked pretty good in the mixed doubles event. Seems like he has, let his injury heal up to the point where, he's coming back somewhere around 100%, which is good. That's a guy that through much of the first half of this season, you could argue was somewhere around the third, fourth best player in tennis. The upside is still tremendous. He's at a phase in his career again where, yeah, if you wouldn't see Sinner Alcaraz winning a slam, he would be among the topmost contenders to do so. As far as guys next in line, for him, I think much better draw than he's had the last 2 slams. And yeah, let's see if he's in any state to, give himself that measuring stick match against Sinner in a quarterfinal potentially. So as we get to number 8, this probably marks a cutoff into your tier 3 guys that could reasonably make deep runs, but probably are not threatening the elites. And at number 8, we got Andrei Rublev, a guy that was not on this list in the first iteration, but like I alluded to in the Alcaraz section, Rublev has found a little bit of something of late. Really, since Safin came on board, he has sort of, turned his season around. He had a pretty dismal run of things for his standards. Going back to Dubai last year, the default there, and his ranking reflected that. I mean, he was well out of the top 10 in the middle part of this year, but since Safin came on board, 2 slam week 2s, 4th round at Roland Garros and Wimbledon. In that span, he's also played Alcaraz really well at Wimbledon and Cincinnati, the latter of which was one of the best matches I think Rublev has ever played against a top-tier opponent. And yeah, against all odds, sort of, he's right back into the Torino picture. Right now, he is only 200 points back of the 10 spot, I believe, in the race. And yeah, given the fact we're on hard course the rest of the way, the conditions suit him, and especially if he is serving the way that he has, particularly in Canada and Cincinnati, that first serve has been doing real damage and giving whoever it is on the other side of the net problems. He keeps serving and playing this way, in all likelihood, he probably will be back in the top 10 and threatening to return to Turin, which you never would have said like 3-4 months ago, because it just felt like, this year was supposed to be destined to be the year that, as a Turin staple, Rublev finally fell out of that picture, but he is right back in that mix now. Number 9, Alex de Minaur falls 2 spots, and nothing really has changed all that much outlook wise for de Minaur. Since winning the DC title, he went out in the quarters to eventual champion Shelton in Canada, and then an early exit at the hands of Opelka, who just had one of those serving days in Cincinnati. And, that sort of revealed the thing that's still there. You have to account for that against the certain matchup, on their day, someone with that type of power can, still to an extent take the racket, take the match out of de Minaur's hands. But yeah, I mean, stylistically against most guys, a locked-in de Minaur is, gonna have a great chance to come out the victor. I still think there's a great chance for him to improve on his standing by year's end on, what was already a career 2024 just because he's healthy down the stretch of this season. You know the strengths, you know the limitations. But yeah, he'll probably still find himself in week 2, you would think. And then at number 10, shout out Karen Kachanov finding his way on this list, shooting up the power rankings really on the back of that Rogers Cup run that was so awesome. Making the second Masters 1000 final of his career, almost 7 years on from his first when he won Bear C in 2018, and that's just wild to think about. Because I remember watching Kachanov 2017-18, I thought this was like such a dynamite prospect. And while it hasn't quite panned out that way, he has certainly carved out an excellent career for himself, a real like top 20, 30 mainstay throughout the course of his career. And, in early 2020s, like 2022, 23, for a window there, he was consistently making quarters, semis of slams, has nabbed a couple of titles in the years since, and wasn't far away at all from, having that Rogers Cup crown to himself. Obviously, lost a third set breaker to Shelton for the title, but even so, got a signature victory, which has been a rarity for Kachanov, upending one of the best. In Zverev. Just played awesome throughout the course of the Rogers Cup, and it's always great to see Kachanov experience success. Seems, by all accounts, one of the nicest guys on tour, and yeah, another guy, what you're gonna get. Interested to see what he can do. Going deep in the last major again, quarter at Wimbledon, and seems to be in great form again. But outside our top 10, I guess noteworthy who fell out, Daniil Medvedev, has been like unfathomably horrible on the hard courts this time of year, when once upon a time during this stretch, he used to be maybe the best performer. He has been awful the last 2 years, and he just can't even be considered, for the lifetime achievement type deal that I was pushing last time I did the list. Paul as well, slipping off. Paul and Musetti both kind of fall into the same camp in that they just have not looked the same since, the injury bug for both of them at Roland Garros. Obviously, Tommy a much better player on hard courts as it is, so, I feel like he's suffered the consequences of it more so. Lore made the final in doubles with Sonego in Cincinnati, but beyond that, it's been dismal for him since the Roland Garros semi. You can talk about a Holger who has always struggled this time of year. You would have to think just the physicality, the conditions of just summer in the States definitely playing a factor there. He's not had a great track record at the U.S. Open. Casper, he's seemingly just totally lost it outside of the tour finals when he makes it since making the U.S. Open final in 2022. Obviously, Tiafoe looking to get up for every U.S. Open will be one as well to keep an eye out on with his U.S. Open track history. Of course, you got your Caboli that made noise during Wimbledon. Actually, could argue should have beaten Shelton in Toronto as well. Diallo's had a good summer as well. It'll be interesting to see what Bublik can do, having not played any hardcore tennis since Wimbledon. ADF after the DC final, really has some trouble with the conditions, kind of gassed out at both Toronto and Cincinnati, where both events he ended up retiring just because the fuel tank hit empty both times. Probably missing someone, but those were just some floaters I thought were worth noting as well as we head into the US Open. Drop preview coming soon, but that will do it for this video. If you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. If you did, it'd be much appreciated if you could drop a like, help this video perform better in YouTube's algorithm, and also subscribe to the channel if you're not already. Thank you all again so much for watching, and of course, I will see y'all in the next one.